The Royal Bank of Canada predicts a recession for 2023. I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. In some ways, it feels like this really isn't news. Many people were feeling this was going to happen, but RBC officially predicts that Canada is heading for a recession in 2023. And as I just mentioned, that's in line with the fears that many of us already had given the current state of the global economy. Now, before we get too deep into what this means, I think it's important to start with a simple definition. What is a recession? It's generally defined as a period of temporary economic decline, during which trade and industrial activity are reduced, and economically, how they can tell if you're in a recession or not is if there is a fall in GDP, gross domestic product, for 2 successive quarters, so for 6 months straight. Now, how might trade and industrial activity decline? Well, there's numerous ways that could happen. On one hand, perhaps the cost of borrowing skyrockets. It's too expensive for us to scale up our productivity. Well, that's one way your industrial activity could decline. Perhaps there's a labor shortage or mass unemployment. Those are other ways your industrial activity could decline, all through which our GDP will suffer for. On the trade side of the equation, perhaps there are supply chain issues that are plaguing the global economy. Perhaps there is war. Perhaps there are trade tensions. All of these things can factor into this equation. People may simply just be choosing not to spend as much as well because inflation has run rampant and their money is getting them less stuff. They have to resort back to the essentials and the luxuries are not in the picture anymore. Now, all of these points I mentioned seem to have amalgamated in some way or another over the past couple of years, and here we are. Now, back to RBC, their exact prediction is that we will endure a moderate and short-lived recession. That's quote for quote what they're expecting next year, so just in 2023, as the economy succumbs to pressures brought on by stubborn inflation, higher rates, those are interest and borrowing rates, and constraints in the labor market. So, to put it simply, they're saying yes, it's going to happen, but it will be short and hopefully not too intense of a recession. And why is that going to occur? Well, you have crazy inflation. You have the interest rates going up, which are meant to tackle the inflation, but as it's doing that, the higher rates are going to have a downward effect on certain things like economic activity. And the labor market, there are constraints on that currently on the supply side. Now, this is bringing back some memories. Where have we heard this before? The terms short, moderate. Well, I can think of 2 times that's come up recently. The first was with COVID. About a month to flatten the curve. It will be short and it'll be moderate and we'll handle that. Well, nope. We're still in the pandemic. The second time I've heard that is with inflation. It's just transitionary. It'll be short, moderate, and once we figure out these supply chain issues, we'll be back to normal. Nope. That's not what happened. So let's hope we don't go 3 for 3 here on predictions. Now, one of the reasons why RBC is somewhat optimistic is because they believe that these trends we're seeing can be reversed once inflation settles down enough for the central bank to lower interest rates again. Right now, the rates are going up as part of a collective effort to get inflation under control. It's not just rates that are impacting the prices that we see, but they play a role. Once the inflation goes back to normal, to our target of something like 2% per year, then we can lower rates and spur the economy and kick off another roaring 20s phase maybe. Now, for the Bank of Canada though, they couple that by saying that we can't afford just yet to take our foot off the gas in the fight against inflation. The key word in that previous point is once inflation settles. They're warning the central bank not to do anything prematurely. Of course, the rising rates are going to have a negative impact. They'll likely usher in that recession, but combating inflation is a major priority. We can't just do nothing. A recession, which will hopefully be short-lived and mild, is a price to pay, but it's something that has to be done to control the inflation rate, which is sitting at a 40-year high at 7.7%. That's not sustainable. If that trend carries over year for multiple years, the value of your dollars, of your savings, of your retirement funds, of everything will go to nothing. That's an ultimate endpoint that we have to avoid. This point is worth lingering on for a second. It's actually not the numeric value on your money that makes it worth something. It's what it can buy. It's the purchasing power, in other words. If $1 can get you all the food you need for a day, then that $1 has a good purchasing power ratio. If that $1 can only get you half a slice of bread, well, it's less powerful. It's still a $1 numeric bill, but what it can get is very different. What inflation does is it erodes the purchasing power. So down the road, you can buy less and less and less with it. And maybe you take that dollar and invest it or put it in a savings account. If your rate of return is lower than the inflation rate, you're still losing out. Getting that inflation rate below what it's currently at is beneficial to everyone. Now, on the flip side, we do have to look at things like unemployment. That's a major concern for many Canadians. RBC expects that the unemployment rate will only rise modestly compared to past downturns, as businesses are already struggling amid a quote-unquote historic labor squeeze. And how do they know that? Well, they cite a report from the Bank of Canada from their latest Business Outlook survey. And in that survey, there are a couple key facts that came out. For one, 4 out of every 10 respondents, so 40%, said their company was facing a labor shortage. They need to hire more people. That may not be true in all fields like tech and whatnot, but overall, that seems to be the case, at least in 40% of the respondents of that survey. Now, further, 68% of respondents said that tight labor conditions were actually worse than a year earlier. Things were better before. So there is a greater drive to hire people right now. There was also a question for employers here, and they said that 73% of them would be expecting to pay higher wages over the next year due to talent just being short in the market right now. And they expect the average pay hike to be 5.8%. So things aren't overly gloomy in the employment sector. And that could be another reason why RBC is slightly optimistic. There are many companies who need people. The companies are realizing that talent is short, and many of them are willing and they're factoring in pay increases to attract that talent. Now, of course, this does not apply to everyone. It sounds to me like this is in particular to specific fields that are trained and highly educated, people who have gone to get things like specialized educations, talent that is scarce. Now, many Canadians don't have that type of luxury. They're working jobs that may be impacted in different ways. They may be in the other part of the survey pool. Recall, it was only 4 in 10 that said their company was facing a labor shortage, which is not the worst news. That's pretty good. It does mean there's a good chunk of companies out there that need people. But how about the other 60%? Perhaps they feel like they're adequate already, or they feel like they're overstaffed. And we have seen layoffs from massive companies lately, like Wealthsimple, for example. I believe they laid off like 13% of their total workforce. Now, of course, I'm sure as more information flows in, RBC may revise their estimate, but this is how they feel right now. The burning question that remains is, what can you do? I do have 3 things to share that is just general advice. The first thing is to cut unnecessary expenses, perhaps like the morning Starbucks drink. Are there cheaper alternatives to that? Can you make it at home? Can you bring a lunch to work if you are in office? Doing things like this will equip you with the habits to survive through a recession more comfortably than you might otherwise would. Further, if you haven't already, create an emergency fund. This is something to rely upon if, it's in the name, an emergency happens, whether that's you being laid off or surprise expense, your car breaks down. Have a pool of money that you can draw from. Now, I've heard estimates vary here. Some people say that you should have about 3 months worth of living expenses saved up and easily accessible. So not held in things like stocks, but in a savings account or something that can be easily turned liquid. And trust me, this will help. Everyone's going to encounter a problem at some point in their life. To not have an emergency fund leaves you scrambling. Leaves you perhaps taking on high interest rate credit card debt to pay something off. Don't put yourself in that position. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to just stop spending money entirely and put everything you have into that emergency fund. It's something that you can build up over time. Put a little bit here and there when you can, and before you know it, it'll be sizable. It'll be a decent cushion that can help you pay that month's rent if your paycheck is late or something has come up. Now, further, prepare for the worst but hope for the best. Recessions are unpredictable. Maybe RBC will be right and it'll be short, it'll be mild, and you'll be okay. Or maybe they're wrong and it'll be a little bit more dastardly than we're currently imagining. Whatever the case, make sure you're equipped to deal with the worst case. During recessions, typically we do see things like unemployment spike. Now, of course, the current trends may not align with that, but Do things like clean up your resume just in case. Do things like check in on your network just in case. Do things like take an extra couple courses here and there to freshen up some skills. Do things like we talked about. Set up an emergency fund. Think about cutting unnecessary expenses. In the best case, you've set up a solid foundation for you that you don't have to use, and in the worst case, you'll be better prepared to handle the situation that you face. So now with that, it does bring us to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoy the material, be sure to leave a review and share. That'll help us grow. And you can find us online at perryplatform.org and on social media at perryplatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.